She was dismissed for defending an orphaned boy, and the prince was the only one who stood by a humble woman. Late spring cloaked the royal palace of Liguria in a haze of warmth and honeysuckle sweet air. Beyond the towering iron gates and sun-dappled courtyards, the marble walls of the inner palace gleamed beneath a cobalt sky, each column and balustrade a testament to centuries of royal grandeur. Inside, the court gathered beneath soaring vaulted ceilings, their voices echoing like birds trapped in a gilded cage. Isabel Rosani moved with practiced grace through the maze of noble skirts and powdered wigs, a folded bundle of pins and silken thread held close to her side. She was not meant to be seen, much less heard. Her presence, like the stitches of her needle, was meant to vanish into the fabric of palace life. The seamstress's dark blue muslin dress clung lightly to her slender frame, its modest lace collar crisply pressed. Her dark hair, bound in a neat braided chignon, gleamed with copper warmth where the sunlight caught it. Summoned to the morning salon by one of Lady Estera's impatient maids, Isabel had come prepared to adjust the noblewoman's new French gown, an over-embellished confection of rose-colored silk that sagged unforgivably along the bodice. Now, beneath the sculpted arch of a marble arcade, she worked silently, kneeling to tug a hidden seam, her fingers deft and sure, even as sweat pricked beneath her collar. "Careful," Lady Estera chided above her. "You will not pull it too tight, I trust." "No, my lady," Isabel replied softly, though her heart pulsed faster beneath the strain of the moment. Nobles and courtiers swirled nearby in bright conversation, oblivious to the quiet struggle between fabric and fit. Then came a shrill cry that sliced through the air like the crack of a whip. "My brooch!" Lady Estera's voice pitched high with disbelief. "It's gone! My emerald brooch! Stolen!" A sudden hush fell across the marble courtyard. Heads turned. Conversations ceased, mid-sentence. Isabel rose instinctively, smoothing her skirts as she followed Lady Estera's wild gestures toward a small side table near her chaise. The velvet case, once nestled atop it, now lay open and empty. Before sense or reason could prevail, a footman's voice rang out, harsh and accusatory. "There! That boy! He was near the table!" All eyes turned to the edge of the courtyard where a slender, barefooted boy stood frozen. Luca, the linen runner. His thin arms clutched a folded sheet against his chest, his large brown eyes wide with terror. "He's a thief!" the footman spat. "Seize him!" "No!" The word escaped Isabel before she could weigh the consequence. She stepped forward, her heart hammering. "You cannot know that!" Two palace guards had already closed in, their heavy boots striking the marble with cruel purpose. One seized Luca roughly by the arm, jerking him forward. The boy's small frame trembled under their grip. "Please," Luca stammered, voice breaking. "I didn't take anything. I swear it." "Search him!" Lady Estera demanded, her face flushed beneath her powdered curls. "I will not suffer such dishonor." "No search has been made," Isabel said firmly, voice cutting through the rising commotion. She advanced another step, her gaze steady on the guards. "You have no proof. The boy's hands are empty. He has not even had a chance to leave the courtyard." Count Ricci entered then, drawn by the mounting crowd. His narrow frame and dark forest green frock coat gave him the look of a vulture descending upon prey. His cold, pale eyes swept the scene. "What is this disruption?" he asked, voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. Lady Estera wasted no time. "That orphan boy has stolen my emerald brooch. This seamstress," she cast a disdainful glance at Isabel, "defends him, boldly, insolently." Count Ricci's gaze flicked to Isabel. His smile was thin and knowing. "Is this true, Mistress Rosani? You presume to contradict a lady of this court?" "I speak only for fairness," Isabel answered, her breath catching in her throat. "No search has been conducted. There is no evidence." Ricci's smile sharpened. "You forget your place, seamstress." She felt the weight of 100 watching eyes, noblemen, courtiers, servants alike, press upon her. But she would not look away, not while the boy still trembled beneath the guard's iron grip. "I will not stand silent while a child is dragged away without cause," she said, her voice steadier than her pulse. The silence that followed was brittle as glass. Ricci turned to the guards. "Remove the boy. If the brooch is not found, we shall have other means to learn its whereabouts." He paused, gaze lingering upon Isabel with calculated disdain. "As for Mistress Rosani, escort her to the steward's office. Immediately." A murmur swept the courtyard. Isabel's breath caught. Dismissal, without trial, without defense. "You cannot," she began, but Ricci's voice rose cold and absolute. "I can, and I do. Insolence will not be tolerated within these walls. You are hereby dismissed from royal service. Your possessions will remain under guard until reviewed. You are to leave the palace at once." The words struck with brutal finality. She stood frozen, disbelief and fury warring within her. Two guards approached, their hands firm upon her arms, though she did not struggle. To resist would only fuel Ricci's triumph. As they led her away, Isabel caught one last glimpse of Luca, his tear-streaked face vanishing beyond the marble columns. An hour later, she stood beneath the towering gates of the palace, the late afternoon sun glaring against pale stone. Her bundle of sewing tools had been thrust unceremoniously into her hands. Her other belongings remained locked away, her wages forfeited. Word of her disgrace traveled faster than her footsteps. Servants whispered behind their fingers. Nobles glanced her way with narrowed eyes. She crossed the threshold alone. The city greeted her with unfamiliar coldness. Though it was spring, clouds had gathered thick and gray above the terracotta rooftops. The narrow streets of Liguria's lower quarter smelled of damp stone and the sea's salt breath. Isabel drew her cloak tighter around her shoulders as she hurried toward her modest lodgings, a narrow apartment above a baker's shop. By the time she reached the door, rain had begun to fall in earnest, soaking the cobbled streets in glistening streams. She climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last, her body weary, her heart raw. Inside, the single room greeted her with its familiar sparseness: a narrow bed, a wooden table, a small hearth, now cold. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, drawing a shuddering breath. What would she do now? Without references, few would hire her. Without her tools and gowns, private commissions were beyond reach. Already she could feel the weight of hunger pressing close. She pressed her forehead to the cool wood, willing herself not to weep. Outside, thunder rumbled low and distant. The rain thickened, streaming down the window panes in rivulets. She crossed the room and lit a stub of candle, its fragile flame wavering in the draught. As she folded her damp cloak across a chair, a glimmer caught her eye. Movement in the street below. Isabel approached the window and peered through the rain-streaked glass. A royal carriage stood at the curb, its black lacquered sides gleaming beneath the gaslight. Upon the door gleamed the unmistakable emblem of House di Fiore. The carriage door opened. A tall figure stepped down, dark cloaked against the storm. Prince Lorenzo. Isabel drew back from the window, her heart racing. And in that moment, she did not know whether to face him or flee. A firm knock sounded at her door. Isabel stood motionless in the center of her small room, one hand resting against the edge of the table as if to steady herself. Her pulse fluttered wildly. Rain lashed the window behind her, muting the sounds of the street. Another knock, a measured pause. Then again, steady, deliberate. She gathered her breath and crossed the floor. Her fingers hesitated on the iron latch, damp with nervous sweat. When the door creaked open, her gaze met the dark, rain-spattered cloak of the man who stood just beyond. Prince Lorenzo. No guards, no footmen. He stood alone beneath the eaves, rain glistening on the shoulders of his cloak, the pale gold of the royal crest faint beneath the wet leather. His black hair, damp and swept back, framed a face sharpened by concern and purpose. "Your Highness," Isabel whispered, stunned. His eyes, deep green, intense, searched hers with unsettling clarity. "Forgive my intrusion." His voice was low, the tone more a man's than a prince's. "I would speak with you." A beat passed, heavy with uncertainty. Reason told her to refuse. Pride urged her to close the door. But something in his gaze, a weariness perhaps, or the faintest thread of kindness, held her still. Wordlessly she stepped aside. Lorenzo entered with quiet grace, pausing just beyond the threshold. The small room seemed to shrink around him. He glanced about, noting the damp cloak hung across the chair, the single wavering candle, the basket of mending by the hearth. His expression grew graver. "I heard what transpired today," he said, removing his gloves. "From someone I trust, a valet who served at the edge of the courtyard." She folded her arms, lifting her chin through her throat tightened. "Then you know the truth of it. I know that a child was accused without proof, and that you were dismissed for speaking against it." He moved no closer, yet his presence filled the room. Isabel searched his face for judgment, but found none. "I did only what conscience demanded," she said, her voice steady despite the storm within. "As would anyone of sense." A flicker of something, admiration perhaps, touched his eyes. "You risked more than you knew." His gaze held hers for a moment too long. Count Ricci wastes no time in reminding others of their place. "So I have discovered." She shifted, the ache of helplessness tightening her chest. "I am no longer welcome in the palace, nor will any noble household seek my work. Word travels swiftly when spoken from the right tongues." He regarded her a moment in thoughtful silence, as if weighing truths unspoken. "You spoke bravely today. I cannot undo the wrong that was done to you." A pause. "But I can see to it that you are not without allies." Isabel's breath caught. "I seek no favor." "Nor do I offer one," Lorenzo replied quietly. "Only fairness." The room seemed too small for such words. She turned, lifting her hands to the basket of mending as if to busy them. "I thank you for your concern, Your Highness, but I have no wish to draw further attention to myself." He watched her with a look that made her pulse thrum unbidden. There was something unnervingly human in his gaze, less prince, more man, and something in her chest pulled taut beneath it. "I understand." His voice had softened. "I will not impose further." She turned slowly to face him, gathering her courage. "Then why come at all?" A faint smile touched the edges of his mouth, not of amusement, but of honesty. "Because I could not forget the look in your eyes today, and because injustice left unanswered weighs heavier than the crown." The truth of it rang in the air between them, raw and unvarnished. For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm beyond the window throbbed in time with the silence. At last, Lorenzo drew on his gloves once more. "Good night, Mistress Rosani." His voice was gentler now. "Should you need anything, my door remains open." He stepped toward the threshold, pausing with one hand on the door. Their gazes met once more, charged, unspoken words caught between them. "Good night, Your Highness," she managed, her voice scarcely above a whisper. He nodded once and disappeared into the rain. Long after the door had closed, Isabel stood rooted where he had left her, the thrum of her heart louder than the storm. The prince's words haunted her, a dangerous kindness, a flicker of regard she dared not return. She was nothing now, a dismissed seamstress, a name whispered with contempt. And yet, shaking the thought from her, she pressed trembling hands to the table's edge and forced her breath to steady. Morning would come, and with it, survival. The weeks that followed blurred beneath a current of quiet resolve. Word of her dismissal had spread like wildfire through the city. Noble women who had once sought her skill now crossed the street to avoid her. Shopkeepers glanced away. Even the common seamstresses, wary of court entanglements, whispered her name behind shuttered hands. Yet pride alone would not feed her. By quiet persistence, Isabel found work in a modest shop tucked along a narrow lane near the harbor, Fiorini's dressmakers. Mistress Fiorini, a practical woman of middle years, cared little for palace gossip so long as her stitches remained sound. "You'll mend and hem for the lower clients," Fiorini had said briskly on her first day. "No custom gowns, mind. I won't risk scandal." So Isabel stitched and stitched. Coarse linen trousers, fraying bodices, worn sleeves. Her fingers ached by dusk. Her pride bled slowly beneath each humble task. But her spirit held fast. She would not be broken. Still, whispers reached her even there. Gossip flared anew within weeks, court tongues wagging over the prince's lone visit to her door. Rumors bloomed of secret liaisons, of scandal barely contained. The city thrived on such stories. In the royal halls, Duchess Valeria heard each word with growing fury. An arranged alliance had bound her to Lorenzo since childhood. It was her right, her destiny. And no seamstress, no common girl disgraced and discarded, would steal from her what had been promised. Count Ricci, ever watchful, whispered counsel in her ear. "Leave her no foothold," he advised coldly. "Ensure no respectable household grants her work. The prince's attentions will fade once her presence disappears." And so the noose tightened. Offers vanished. Doors closed. Only Mistress Fiorini's modest shop remained. Through it all, Isabel endured. By late summer, the city hummed with preparations for the annual charity ball, a grand affair meant to court favor with Liguria's rising merchant class. The event promised new gowns, new wealth, new alliances. For dressmakers, it was a season of frantic commissions. Mistress Fiorini, eager to profit, secured several contracts, and with her best seamstress overworked, she assigned Isabel to assist. "You'll prepare hems and final stitches," Fiorini instructed. "Work discreetly. Speak to no one." Isabel accepted without protest. Coin was coin. The night of the ball arrived beneath a velvet dark sky. Gas lamps bathed the stone plaza in flickering gold as carriages rattled toward the palace's secondary hall. Within, crystal chandeliers rained light upon polished marble floors. Silk-clad guests glided through the space in a swirl of color and perfume. In a curtained alcove behind the grand hall, Isabel worked in shadow, her needle darting swiftly through crimson satin, her breath shallow with concentration. She had meant to avoid the main floor altogether, but an urgent request from Mistress Fiorini sent her briefly to the gown porters near the hall's edge. There, between the parted curtains, her gaze lifted and collided with his. Prince Lorenzo stood across the vast expanse, clad in formal navy with gold braid gleaming beneath the light. His eyes met hers in an instant of stunned recognition. For one suspended heartbeat, the noise of the room faded. No words passed. None were needed. The current between them burned with the weight of all that had been left unsaid. Then a voice intruded, a familiar, clipped tone. "You must ensure she is no longer seen," Duchess Valeria murmured, her voice a blade. "The prince's foolishness cannot be allowed to linger." Hidden in a shadowed corridor beyond the alcove, Isabel stilled as another voice, Count Ricci's, joined hers. "Leave it to me," he replied. "The seamstress scandal ends tonight." A cold shiver raced down Isabel's spine, and then, clear as ice, she heard her name, spoken in tones meant to wound. The words still rang in her ears long after the shadows had swallowed the corridor. "The seamstress scandal ends tonight." Isabel forced herself to move, her steps light and swift as she returned to her place behind the curtains. The ball unfolded beyond her with the glitter of chandeliers and the hum of strings, but its brightness only deepened the cold weight settling in her chest. She kept her head down, her hands steady as they finished the last of the hems, her heart racing beneath the confines of her corset. The prince had seen her. She had seen him. And now, Count Ricci and Duchess Valeria had spoken her name with a menace that could not be mistaken. The storm had only begun. 3 mornings later, as grey dawn filtered through the cracked shutters of the shop, Isabel bent over her stitching with tired eyes. The seams of a simple day gown awaited her attention, the needle slipping rhythmically through worn cotton. The shop bell chimed, a soft note that made her look up instinctively. Mistress Fiorini rose from behind her counter. Isabel's gaze followed the woman's sudden stiffening. Then the door swung wider, and Prince Lorenzo entered. He wore no crown or sash today, only a charcoal grey frock coat of elegant cut, the edges of a cream waistcoat visible beneath. Yet, even stripped of royal regalia, he carried an air that commanded attention. "Your Highness," Mistress Fiorini said quickly, bowing low, "how may we serve you?" His gaze swept the room with unhurried precision. Isabel straightened behind the work table, every muscle taut with awareness. "I am here to request a commission," Lorenzo said. His voice was even, but beneath the calm she sensed something else. Purpose, intent. "For my sister's name day, an embroidered handkerchief, one of your finer pieces." Mistress Fiorini hesitated. "Of course, Your Highness. I can assign—" "I would prefer Mistress Rosani to take the work," Lorenzo interrupted gently. His gaze met Isabel's with deliberate clarity. A hush followed. Isabel's breath caught. She knew the risk. To accept meant exposure. To refuse meant insult. Her voice emerged with practiced steadiness. "I would be honored, Your Highness." Mistress Fiorini glanced between them, her mouth tight. "As you wish." Lorenzo approached the work table. He stood close enough that Isabel caught the subtle scent of bergamot and clean linen. "The design," he said quietly, laying a fine linen square before her. "A vine motif. My sister favors ivy." She reached for her pencil, her fingers trembling only slightly. "And the initials?" "E di fiore," he answered, his voice softening. "And if possible, a small cluster of forget-me-nots in one corner." She glanced up at that. Forget-me-nots. A flower of memory, of quiet promises. Their eyes locked, the moment stretched taut between them. Words hovered unspoken in the charged space. Isabel's pulse drummed beneath her ribs. "I will begin today," she said, breaking the silence. "Thank you." His gaze lingered a beat too long before he straightened. "I will call again to approve the work." And then he was gone. Isabel exhaled only when the door closed behind him. Mistress Fiorini's voice cut the quiet. "Be cautious." Isabel nodded once, though her heart was no calmer for it. Days passed, and the prince returned. Once, to examine the growing embroidery. Again, to discuss thread selection. Each visit was brief, conducted beneath the wary eye of Mistress Fiorini, but the undercurrent between them deepened with every meeting. The air seemed thinner when he stood near. Every glance burned warmer than propriety allowed. Yet neither of them spoke the words that hovered unsaid. Lorenzo, for his part, left behind more than coin. He spoke with Mistress Fiorini in quiet tones one morning, unseen by Isabel. Later that day, Fiorini informed her that new commissions had been secured and that no house dared interfere with the shop's business. "You are protected for now," Fiorini told her with a look Isabel could not quite decipher. Gratitude warred with unease in her heart. Still, the work sustained her. One crisp afternoon, Isabel stepped into the narrow bookshop on Via della Rosa. The scent of old paper and binding glue welcomed her in. She sought no particular volume, only a moment of peace. Yet as she rounded a corner of stacked tomes, a familiar figure appeared before her. Prince Lorenzo stood by the window, a leather-bound history of Ligurian art in hand. At her sudden presence, he looked up, a rare smile softening the line of his mouth. "Mistress Rosani." "Your Highness." She dipped a curtsy, her heart tightening. "Lorenzo," he said quietly, setting the book aside. "We are beyond titles, I think." She straightened, her gaze wary. "I am not certain we are beyond anything." The honesty of her reply seemed to please him. "Walk with me." She hesitated, then nodded. They strolled beneath the arcaded streets, where the sunlight dappled stone and the sea's scent carried faintly on the breeze. Conversation came slowly at first, words laden with caution. Yet beneath the surface, something warmer stirred. They spoke of books, of the city's hidden corners, of the sea's shifting moods. Each glance lingered a moment longer than sense allowed. By the time the shadows lengthened, Isabel knew her heart had begun to betray her. They parted beneath the awning of the dressmaker's shop. Lorenzo's fingers brushed hers as he took his leave, a fleeting touch, yet it set her skin alight. She watched him go, breathless with longing she dared not name. The season turned, and the court's intrigues sharpened. One evening, Isabel was summoned to assist with alterations at a private musicale hosted by the Countess degli Alberi. The invitation came through Mistress Fiorini, accompanied by a veiled warning: behave with caution. The grand salon glittered with gilt and candlelight. Nobles in silks and velvets filled the space, their laughter bright and brittle. Isabel kept to the edges, her needle swift and her gaze lowered. Yet no caution could shield her when Duchess Valeria crossed her path. The Duchess's voice cut through the music, loud enough for every ear. "How bold the palace seamstress has grown," she said, her smile sharp as a blade. "Stitching hems here, whispering to princes there." A hush fell. Heat flooded Isabel's cheeks, her fingers trembling. She forced herself to meet the Duchess's gaze, her own expression calm. "My work speaks for itself, Your Grace." Laughter rippled through the room, but not all were amused. Prince Lorenzo moved through the crowd, his gaze locked on the scene. Without hesitation, he approached and addressed Isabel with cool formality. "Mistress Rosani, my sister speaks highly of your skill. Perhaps you would accept further commissions." The deliberate weight of his words hung in the air. Duchess Valeria's smile froze. The room shifted subtly, the tide turning. Isabel lowered her gaze in grateful composure. "I would be honored, Your Highness." Later that night, in the quiet of her room, the memory of his defense warmed her, even as new dangers loomed. The next blow came swift and unseen. Rumors surfaced in the streets that Isabel had written fabricated letters to the prince, seeking to force his hand, that she meant to blackmail him with false affections. The lies spread with venomous speed. Customers vanished. Even Mistress Fiorini looked at her with wary eyes. Then the summons arrived. A liveried messenger delivered it without ceremony. Isabel was to appear before the royal council at once, accused of sedition and dishonor. There was no time to prepare, no counsel to seek. An hour later, clad in her plainest gown, Isabel climbed the marble steps of the council chamber. The guards swung the towering doors wide. The hall beyond gleamed with cold stone and candlelight. Figures in crimson and black lined the dais. Her heart thundered as she crossed the threshold. Behind her, the heavy doors began to close. The heavy doors closed with a resounding thud, sealing Isabel inside the council chamber. The sound echoed through the cavernous space, its finality chilling her to the bone. She stood alone on the polished marble floor, her simple slate-grey gown a stark contrast to the crimson-draped seats of the tribunal above her. The ceiling arched impossibly high, frescoes of long-dead rulers gazing down with imperious disdain. Golden candelabras cast flickering light across the assembled councillors, their powdered wigs and severe faces blending into a sea of judgment. At the center of them all sat Count Ricci, lean and composed in his forest green frock coat. His pale gray eyes rested on her with measured calculation. To his left and right, members of Liguria's highest court murmured among themselves, nobles, ministers, and courtiers whose allegiance bent with the prevailing wind. Isabel kept her shoulders square, though her heart pounded so fiercely she feared they must all hear it. The stone beneath her slippered feet felt colder with every passing second. A herald's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "The matter before this council concerns Mistress Isabel Rosani, formerly of the royal household, now accused of sedition, blackmail, and attempting to disgrace the royal family." A ripple of whispers coursed through the chamber. Isabel's throat tightened. She fought to draw breath, her hands clasped tightly before her. Count Ricci rose with deliberate grace. "The accusations brought forth are grave," he began, each word enunciated with icy precision. "This woman, once a humble seamstress in service to the crown, has sought through means both cunning and dishonorable to entrap the heir to the throne. Letters, forged and deceitful, have been discovered, letters in which she implies a romantic understanding with His Highness, Prince Lorenzo." The words fell like blows, each one tightening the vice around Isabel's chest. "She has attempted," Ricci continued, "to tarnish the prince's honor, and by extension, that of this court. Such actions, should they be proven, warrant the severest consequences." A chorus of low voices swelled, doubt and disdain winding through the council. Isabel forced her voice to steady. "I have written no such letters," she said, her words clear, though her breath trembled. "I have no knowledge of them. This is a fabrication." A cold smile touched Ricci's lips. "Naturally, such protestations are to be expected." More whispers, louder now. Isabel scanned the faces before her and found no sympathy there, only veiled contempt, or worse, eager curiosity. She tried again, her voice rising above the swell. "I defended a child falsely accused. For that I was dismissed, and now I am summoned here on the weight of lies." "Lies?" Ricci's voice cut through hers. "You deny that you sought to ensnare the prince through false affection?" "I deny it utterly." Her cheeks burned with fury, her pulse thudding like a drum. Ricci spread his hands in a gesture of mock regret. "And yet the letters exist. The motives are clear, the pattern undeniable. Shall we permit such a woman to undermine the dignity of this court?" A wave of murmurs rolled across the chamber, many heads nodding in grim agreement. Isabel's voice cracked beneath the weight of it. "I have done nothing dishonorable," she cried. "You twist the truth because I spoke against injustice." Her words were nearly drowned by the rising voices. The councillors leaned in toward one another, their faces hardening. From his elevated seat, Ricci's gaze never wavered. "The verdict shall be rendered." The herald stepped forward, preparing to speak. Then, without warning, the chamber doors flew open with a thunderous echo that rattled the stone walls. Every head turned. Prince Lorenzo strode into the hall, his navy tailcoat immaculate, his expression carved from stone. His green eyes burned with a force that stilled the room. "I invoke my right as heir to address this council," Lorenzo announced, voice steady and resonant. A collective gasp swept the tribunal. Councillors whispered urgently. Ricci's face remained impassive, though a faint flicker crossed his gaze. "You may speak," the herald said, though his voice shook. Lorenzo advanced to the center of the floor, coming to stand at Isabel's side. His presence beside her sent a shock of warmth through her veins. He turned to face the tribunal. "I have heard these accusations, and I tell you now, they are baseless, a fabrication born of petty malice." The chamber erupted in startled murmurs. Lorenzo raised his voice, cutting through them. "Mistress Rosani is a woman of integrity. I have sought her company, not out of obligation, but admiration. Admiration for her courage, her honor, and her unwavering sense of justice." The words seemed to hang suspended in the air. "She defended a helpless child when no one else would," Lorenzo continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "For that, she was punished. Now she is dragged before this tribunal on lies carefully spun by those who fear truth." Ricci rose, his voice smooth. "Your Highness, your sentiments are noted. But the evidence—" "There is no evidence," Lorenzo snapped. "Only forgeries, planted to discredit an innocent woman. I know her character. I stand before you to say that my regard for her is genuine. And should you seek to silence her further, you will answer to me." A stunned silence followed. Then the chamber buzzed anew. Shock, outrage, fascination crackling through the air. Isabel stood frozen beside him, her heart pounding. His words, so bold, so bare, had changed the very air between them. Ricci's smile returned, brittle and thin. "We are not here to debate sentiment, Your Highness." "Sentiment?" Lorenzo's voice rang out. "This is not sentiment. It is truth. And if this court condemns an innocent woman today, it will do so without the consent of its future king." A shiver ran through the assembled counselors. The weight of Lorenzo's challenge was undeniable. At last, after a tense pause, the herald spoke. "The council shall deliberate." A bell rang sharply, signaling the suspension of proceedings. Lorenzo turned to Isabel, his eyes softening. "Come." Without a word, she followed him through the silent crowd, her steps light despite the turmoil within her. Together they exited the chamber, the heavy doors closing behind them. The palace gardens lay in twilight hush, the air rich with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Along the marble path, lanterns cast pools of golden light. Lorenzo led her beneath an arbor of trailing ivy, far from prying eyes. There, beneath the shelter of green and shadow, he turned to face her fully. "You should not have risked yourself," Isabel whispered, voice raw with emotion. "You have placed yourself in their path." "They had already placed themselves in mine," he said simply. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "You spoke so plainly." His gaze searched hers. "I could no longer abide silence." A pause, laden with feeling. "Nor do I wish to hide my regard for you." Her breath caught. "You must not say such things." "I must," he said quietly. "I have admired your courage from the first. Each moment since has only deepened that admiration." A fragile silence followed, charged with months of longing. Isabel felt her composure slipping, the ache of want rising beyond restraint. His voice dropped. "Do you resent my words?" "No," she whispered. "I do not." The distance between them seemed to vanish, drawn closed by the force of unspoken desire. His hand lifted slowly, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "Isabel," he murmured, her name a vow. She swayed toward him, unable to stop herself. His mouth found hers in a kiss, tentative, reverent, yet searing in its depth. Her hands rose to his shoulders, fingers trembling against the fine wool. The world dissolved, leaving only the warmth of his mouth, the thrum of her heart, the quiet hum of fate. When they parted, breathless, neither spoke for a long moment. Then Lorenzo's voice, low and steady. "We cannot trust the court. We must face what comes, together." As dawn's first light began to pale the sky, he turned to her, resolve burning in his eyes. "I will go to my father. I will confront the king, and I will defy them all." The first light of dawn filtered through the east-facing windows of the royal apartments, casting pale bands across the worn tapestry walls. The scent of old smoke and lavender oil lingered in the air, mingling with the faint chill of the early hour. Prince Lorenzo paced the length of the narrow antechamber outside his father's private study, each step deliberate, his boots soundless on the thick rug. His heart thudded with a relentless rhythm, steady yet charged with resolve. The moment had come. There would be no retreat. At a signal from the chamberlain, the doors opened with a muted creak. Lorenzo drew a slow breath and entered. King Vittorio sat alone at his writing desk, a broad oak table strewn with petitions and royal decrees. The king's once imposing frame seemed smaller now beneath the weight of his years, the deep navy velvet of his robe emphasizing the gauntness of his face. His hair, once black as pitch, had turned to fine silver. Only his dark eyes remained sharp beneath heavy lids, eyes that had weathered decades of alliances, betrayals, and wars. He looked up slowly as his son approached. "You rise early, Lorenzo," the king said, his voice dry but clear. "I have little choice," Lorenzo replied. "There is much to speak of." The king gestured to the chair opposite his own. "Then speak." Lorenzo did not sit. Instead, he stood tall, his posture one of unwavering intent. "Father, I have come to speak of Mistress Isabel Rosani." A faint flicker crossed Vittorio's gaze. He leaned back in his chair, folding his thin hands atop the desk. "I suspected as much. The council's treatment of her was a disgrace," Lorenzo said, each word measured. "She is innocent of the charges laid against her. The accusations were a mask for the court's own corruption." The king said nothing. Lorenzo pressed on. "I stood before the tribunal. I spoke the truth. Now I come to you, not as your heir, but as your son, a man who cannot and will not abandon the woman he loves." A silence stretched between them. At last, Vittorio sighed, a sound laden with the weariness of years. "You would cast aside every expectation placed upon you, every alliance I have forged for this woman?" "I would," Lorenzo said simply. "And if I forbid it?" Lorenzo's gaze did not waver. "Then I will forfeit my succession. I will leave this court behind rather than betray my heart." The words hung in the air, stark and irrevocable. The king's brow furrowed. He studied his son for a long moment, the lines of his face deepening with contemplation. At length, he spoke. "You are your mother's son. She too would have faced ruin for love." A shadow crossed the king's features, a memory long buried. "I am not blind to the court's poison," Vittorio continued, "nor to Count Ricci's ambitions." His voice grew heavier. "Yet this is not a decision made lightly. The stability of the realm is at stake." Lorenzo inclined his head. "I understand, Father. But the stability of the realm will not endure if built upon injustice." Another silence followed, this one laced with resignation. Finally, the king nodded. "Very well. You shall have your answer before the council." Relief and apprehension surged through Lorenzo in equal measure. He bowed. "Thank you, Father." As he withdrew from the study, the faintest trace of a smile touched the king's mouth. "Be certain of your path, my son. For once chosen, there is no turning back." "I am certain," Lorenzo said softly, and the doors closed behind him. Outside the palace walls, the city stirred with restless energy. News of the prince's public defense of Isabel had spread through the markets and alleyways like wildfire. Merchants spoke of it in hushed tones. Artisans praised the prince's courage. Common folk whispered of the seamstress who had dared defy the nobility. Even among the nobility, divisions had begun to show. Some dismissed the affair as folly. Others, mindful of the court's overreach, began to question the wisdom of opposing a future king whose popularity only seemed to rise. Within the shadowed corners of the palace, however, desperation brewed. Duchess Valeria paced the length of her private salon, her silk skirts rustling with every agitated step. Count Ricci stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed on the gray morning sky. "You assured me this would be ended," Valeria hissed. "And now the king listens to him. The people murmur of this seamstress, as if she were some tragic heroine." Ricci's voice remained cool. "The king is old. His will falters, but the court still bends to those who hold true power." "Then bend it," Valeria snapped, "before I am humiliated before them all." Ricci's eyes narrowed. "We must proceed carefully. One misstep now could see us both cast out." A sharp knock interrupted them. A message arrived from the king, summoning the full council for a final session. Ricci read the summons with a grim smile. "It is not over yet." Later that day, the great council chamber filled once more, the air thick with tension. Isabel stood beside Lorenzo, her hand trembling slightly within his. She wore a simple gown of deep blue, her head held high despite the weight of 100 eyes upon her. The king entered last, his presence commanding silence. He took his seat and surveyed the room with weary authority. "We are gathered to settle this matter," he said. "Let none speak until I have done so." A murmur rippled through the chamber, quickly stilled. Vittorio's gaze swept over Count Ricci, lingered upon Duchess Valeria, then settled on Lorenzo and Isabel. "It has been made clear to me," the king continued, "that grave wrongs were committed in the handling of Mistress Rosani's case. The accusations brought forth were founded upon falsehoods and ambition." A shocked gasp escaped Valeria. Ricci's jaw tightened. "The woman before you is blameless," the king said. "And as sovereign, I acknowledge the right of my son, the Prince of Liguria, to choose his own bride." Lorenzo's grip on Isabel's hand tightened with quiet strength. The king's voice grew colder. "Count Ricci, you have overstepped the bounds of your station. In light of your conduct, you are hereby stripped of authority. You will depart Liguria within the fortnight, or face exile." Ricci's composure cracked for an instant, but he inclined his head stiffly. "As you command, your majesty." "And as for the engagement between my son and Duchess Valeria," the king said, turning toward her, "it is dissolved." Valeria rose in a swirl of silk, her face pale with fury. "You disgrace this court for the sake of a seamstress." Vittorio's gaze did not waver. "I uphold justice, and no station, high or low, is above it." A stunned silence followed. Then, softly at first, a ripple of assent moved through the chamber. Lorenzo turned to Isabel, his gaze filled with unguarded warmth. For the first time since this ordeal began, her heart lifted, fragile yet strong. The king's voice carried one final decree. "Let this matter be ended. May love and honor prevail." The session was dismissed. The days that followed unfolded in a blur of quiet preparation. Public sentiment swelled in Lorenzo's favor. The people, moved by the prince's defiance and the seamstress's courage, gathered beneath palace balconies in support. Nobles who had once whispered now offered cautious congratulations. Through it all, Isabel remained steady, though the enormity of what lay ahead pressed close. She would not falter now. One morning, beneath the vaulted arches of the palace chapel, Lorenzo and Isabel stood side by side. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, bathing the small gathering in jeweled light. Only their closest supporters were present, those who had stood by them when all others had turned away. The ceremony was simple, its words spoken with reverence. When Lorenzo placed the slender gold band upon Isabel's finger, her vision blurred with tears. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the chapel filled with a hush that seemed to echo eternity. Later, beneath a sky of flawless blue, Lorenzo and Isabel walked hand in hand through the palace gardens. The scent of jasmine drifted on the breeze, mingling with the distant song of a fountain. Ahead, beneath a sun-dappled arbor, Luca played with a wooden hoop, his laughter ringing bright and free. Isabel smiled, her heart full beyond measure. She glanced up at Lorenzo, who looked down at her with a gaze that held no crown, no title, only love. They paused beneath the arching boughs, their fingers entwined. Together, they had defied the world, and together, they would face whatever came next. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the story? Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a like to show your support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotions and life lessons. And before we say goodbye, we'd like to remind you that on the end screen, you'll see a recommendation for another exciting and charming story. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.